Welcome to the Anime Audiophile Podcast. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Kakashi Retsuden, the Sixth Hokage and the Failed Prince. Chapter 5. The hand holding the Shuigu was cold with sweat and shaking. Minari stood on the cliff and trembled as she looked down on the battlefield. Below her, the people of the land of Ridaku were fighting each other. When the morning sun began to shine, she was able to see much more clearly the state of the encampment blanketed in gunfire smoke. The people fighting all over, pushing and shoving each other. A soldier who found his chance in the chaos fired in the direction of Nagar. A cannonball grazed the village rooftops and exploded. The blast peeled the roof tiles from the surrounding houses and caused them to collapse as well. People lived in those houses. Her brother lived in one of them. She had brought all of this on. We were correct to evacuate early. The Prime Minister tied his horse to a rocky outcropping and looked down with glee. Correct? This was correct. She had long stopped being able to follow the Prime Minister's way of thinking. But she'd never been able to argue with him. She'd simply been dragged along, and now she was here, watching her people fight. She suddenly remembered the day it was decided that she would inherit the throne. The day the Prime Minister had handed her this tool. She had been proud to think that she would protect this country, just like her father had. First, she tried to make a light rain fall, enough to wet the vegetation. She brandished the Shuigu with this intention, but the tool had completely ignored her will. Instead of a gentle shower, it had called up a flash flood. The wheat fields were washed away, mere days from being harvested, and she'd only finally been able to stop the turbulent current when it was on the verge of swallowing the capital. No people had died, but plenty of livestock had been caught in the waters and drowned. It had been a huge blow to the capital's self-sufficiency. The Shuigu didn't recognize her as ruler. She thought that was why she couldn't use it. My biggest mistake was becoming queen in the first place. She felt a belated regret and bit her lip. Having lost the means of making rain fall, the land of Ridaku was suddenly facing a drought. Some government ministers proposed that she train to use the Shuigu, but Minari had refused. When she thought about how she might destroy the country if it ran wild again, she could not muster up that kind of courage. This, however, would not resolve the water shortage. There is no need to push yourself to try and master it. The Prime Minister had been the only one to try and comfort her. She'd been happy at this kindness, and she trusted the Prime Minister. Wanting to avert her eyes from the reality before her, she had obediently followed his suggestions. And this was the result. His plan was not going well, and it had brought about a civil war. "My queen, be ready to use the Shuigu," the Prime Minister said. Minari slowly lifted her face. "But I can't use it. There is no need to master it." The Prime Minister smiled craftily. "We shall simply let it run wild once more and wash away the village in its entirety. A village that won't march in step with its queen is better not existing." Unable to understand what he was saying, Minari stared at the Prime Minister. "However dire things are, that's simply—" "You're saying you can't?" He turned eyes sharp like a hawk on her, and she shrank back. Timidly, she held the Shuigu up in front of her. But she quickly lowered her arms. "I cannot." Murmuring this in a trembling voice was all the resistance she could offer. The Prime Minister clucked his tongue and yanked the Shuigu away. "Give that back." Minari reached out to take the tool back, but the Prime Minister sidestepped her and raised the Shuigu. A massive ball of water flew out and struck her directly in the face. Knocked over by the force of it, Minari fell onto her backside, soaked. A heartbeat later, the mass of water fell over her head with a splash. "Why?" The Prime Minister could clearly handle the Shuigu. Much more skillfully than Minari. "How? Are you able to use the Shuigu?" she asked. "How indeed?" The Prime Minister turned the end of the staff toward Nagar. And then he noticed someone on the cliff wall and snorted with laughter. "Oh my! Your little brother is climbing up the cliff with such vigor. Nanera? The Prime Minister brandished the shoigu, and a current of water began to swirl around the ring at the tip. Just like iron sand gathered around a magnet, the water gradually increased in volume, becoming an enormous sphere. Stop! Manari started to run over to him, but her feet slipped on the wet rock and she fell. The Prime Minister brought the shoigu down. The stream of water raised its head like an ocean serpent and plunged toward the bottom of the cliff. Nanera climbed, desperately. The amphiboles that composed the cliff broke easily, making them useful stone material for paving roads, but rendering them a serious hindrance at the moment. Oh! The rock beneath his foot broke away, and he very nearly lost his balance. He followed the falling stone with his eyes and swallowed hard. He felt like he'd gotten pretty high, but Manari and the Prime Minister were still far above. I have to hurry. As if to spur him on, the sound of explosions came unceasingly from the ground. He reached a hand that was already covered in scratches up to a rock above his head. A throb of pain ran through his fingers, but he gritted his teeth to endure it, bent his arm, and pulled his body up. Then the entire cliff shuddered. When he looked up, an enormous body of water was swirling on the edge of the rock face above. It grew in thickness before his eyes to become a torrent and plummet toward him. Wah! Clutching the cliff, Nanera had nowhere to run. He curled into himself and clenched his jaw. Just as he was prepared to be swallowed up by water at any second, a hot wind blew past above his head. It was an enormous bird of fire. Flaming wings spread, it charged into the center of the oncoming current. The two slammed into each other, and the powerful heat of the flames lapped up the liquid. The enormous body of water evaporated into mist and disappeared. Nanera knew this technique. He had pretended to do it over and over and over, playing with Samir in the field. If Lightning Blade had the power to cut lightning, then this phoenix had enough power to change water into mist. Fire-style mist. This was one of the 6th Hokage's many techniques and Nanera's personal favorite. You're not hurt? He heard a familiar, kind, low voice from directly beside him. He jerked his head in that direction and found Kakashi standing comfortably on one leg on a foothold the size of a coin. Did you do that? Why would you know the 6th Hokage's? I'll explain later. Kakashi held Nanera to one side and nimbly jumped up from rock to rock until he finally flew up unpleasantly high and landed in front of Manori and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was not surprised, but instead narrowed his eyes in a smile. Well, the Master Tutor. The fact that you're wearing that headband. I knew it. You are a shinobi. Nanera noticed for the first time the headband that covered Kakashi's left eye. A belt of fabric with a board on it. In the center of the board, there were marks where the surface had been carved out. Why is he deliberately hiding his left eye? He wondered, while Kakashi leaped to one side, still holding the young prince, to get some distance from the Prime Minister. Planning to flee? Reacting with a quickness that belied his age, the Prime Minister swung the shoigu. The pillar of water that jetted out headed straight for Kakashi. Kakashi set Nanera down on the ground and wove signs. A massive blaze burned above his head, and a phoenix mist came flying out. Mist stopped in front of Kakashi to protect him and met the pillar of water head-on. It wrapped its burning wings around the entire column, swallowed it up, and turned it to vapor. Incredible! The Prime Minister murmured, entranced, as he stared at the dissipating steam. Of the 5 styles, fire should have been weak to water, but Kakashi's mist had such power that it turned this disadvantage around to resist the shoigu. Even though the source of the shoigu's power was the chakra of the Sage of 6 Paths. So, Lord Tutor, you were the one who created the earth wall. But after maintaining something like that for over a day, you must have very little chakra remaining? That's what you hope. But I have a quick question for you. Kakashi was unable to hide his anger at the sinister delight in the Prime Minister's eyes as he asked, Why can you use the shoigu when you're not a member of the royal family? The instrument in question ready before him, the Prime Minister said nothing. Kakashi glanced at the sky before returning his gaze to the older man and asking another question. Prime Minister, so you made a contract with the shoigu before Queen Mayari, Contract? What do you mean? Nanera interjected from behind Kakashi. To use a tool imbued with chakra, you generally need a contract between the tool and the user, Kakashi replied. Most likely, after the king's death, the Prime Minister secretly made a contract with the shoigu before the queen. He turned his gaze toward Mayari, who had sunk to the ground and was watching them fight. The fact that you can't use the shoigu isn't your fault. It's just that you don't have a contract with it. The thoroughly terrified Mayari digested Kakashi's words slowly, and a stunned look came across her face. Itachi Kakashi. It is just as you say, the Prime Minister said, laughter in his voice, as he geared up to strike. I made a contract with the shoigu before Queen Mayari could. I am not the king, but I can use the shoigu. Isn't this fact itself proof that the king is nothing more than decoration? You're going to take her place? Kakashi asked. Exactly, he shouted and flapped his long sleeves. The ring of the raised shoigu turned toward Mayari. Mayari! Run! Before Nanera had finished shouting, Kakashi had already woven his signs. Light came from the shoigu ring, and a whirlpool of water several times larger than the last one began rotating counterclockwise, heading straight for Mayari. At the same time, red-hot embers jumped up on Kakashi's palm. In the blink of an eye, they took on the form of an enormous bird and set out for the whirlpool at the speed of light. The whirlpool and the bird of flames collided. Mist's bird shape collapsed, and it returned to being a pile of hot embers, while the whirlpool was thrown back like a curtain from the shock of the collision. It might have looked like Mist disappeared, but the flames stretched up, looking at the sky, and swallowed the raging stream of water. SHFFF. Both water and fire were cancelled out, and only steam rose into the sky. I cannot understand why a shinobi of your caliber would protect an incompetent child, the Prime Minister sniffed. That's a terrible thing to say about the royal family you've served for so many years, Kakashi said. I served the previous king, the Prime Minister cried, in his hoarse elderly voice. I swore my loyalty to the previous king, and I served him for more than 30 years. I had no family, I devoted myself to my duties, I wore myself to the bone for this country. And despite this, it was not I who was to be the next king, but you children. Is that not absurd? He glared at Mayari and Nanera in turn, eyes burning with anger. Is blood so important as that? More than hard work? More than experience? It's not, Nanera answered in a choked voice. I know that. The royal family's a sham. We're just regular people. But I've changed since I met Kakashi. Exactly because it is a sham, I want to be the kind of person who's judged by his actions. That's what I've started thinking. So that I can be proud of the blood I inherited from my father. If that's what you think, then I will have you die here for your country. A whirlpool began to swirl at the tip of the shoigu. I've gotten quite good with this instrument, you see. I can also do this. The Prime Minister smiled and slid the ring to the side. The silhouette of the water bent and transformed into a massive bird. As if in response, flames jetted above Kakashi's head and manifested a burning mist. Bird of flames versus bird of water. The one that took the initiative was the bird of water. It had no sooner stretched out its long neck than it was letting out a roar and vomiting a column of water. To meet this, the bird of flames spat out a pillar of flame. Water and fire crashed into each other violently. But in the next instant, fire pushed water back. The flames swallowed up the column of water and kept pushing forward to pierce the body of the bird. The creature let out a death cry as it emitted scalding hot steam and disappeared. With this fourth summoning of mist, Kakashi had basically used up all his chakra, but he called to the Prime Minister with a casual look to keep him from sensing this fact. Say, if you defeat me here and invade the Land of Fire, that group of shinobi you've assembled don't have a chance of winning. I mean, you have to know that, right? Humph, the Prime Minister snorted. I told you that we would be receiving support from the Astronomical Institute. I was never counting on the cannons or the shinobi army alone. Not to mention I have the Shuegu. This tool that allows me to use the chakra of the Sage of Six Paths, the father of all shinobi, and as long as I dash. It is not a weapon for killing people. Nanera cried, trembling with anger. It's to bring water to this country. It's your fault that people are starving in the capital. You took the Shuegu from my sister and made a mess of the land. Boom! He heard a cannon fire far below them. While they were standing around up here, Negar was under attack. The faces of Margot, Sumir, and all the villagers popped into his head one after the other, and Nanera twisted his own face up. A small sacrifice for a great cause, the Prime Minister spat, annoyed that the prince could not understand this. The reason this country is poor is the land. Unable to trade in any real way with other countries, we content ourselves with the limited crops we can take from these barren lands and shut ourselves away to live in secret. No matter how much time passes, we do not develop. I want to make the land of Ridaku like the Land of Fire. I will turn this backward nation, where people die simply because it does not rain, into an advanced country that controls nature with powerful technology. To that end, we need new, fertile land. He shifted his gaze from Nanera to Kakashi. Shinobi of the Land of Fire. Born and raised in wealth, you would force us to live in poverty in the middle of nowhere? There was a brief silence. Kakashi looked past the older man toward the sky spreading out behind him. Prime Minister. It's all fine and good to look to other countries, but you're holding onto phantoms here. It's not like the Land of Fire has always been rich. We had a period of stagnation and ruin, full of endless war with no purpose. Kakashi took the glove off his right hand and tossed it aside. A country that went through war and became rich, and a country that has lived quietly avoiding war. I don't know which way is better. But at the very least, this place was at peace until the previous king's generation. And now you're planning to invade my homeland. As a shinobi of Konoha, I can't let that pass. We're not going to see eye to eye, The Prime Minister caressed the staff of the Shuegu and smiled. A practitioner like you, I would have loved to have you with me. It's too bad. Shall we stop this idle argument here then? Agreed. Nothing more boring than a long story from an old man, Kakashi quipped, and the Prime Minister's gaze grew even harder. But his expression froze when Kakashi slowly removed the headband that hid his left eye. That eye, he gasped. Kakashi's left eye shone faintly, imbued with a red light and patterned with tomo. Anyone who had more than a passing knowledge of shinobi would have heard about it from someone. The proud name Kakashi of the Sharingan blasted through every country. I see. The Prime Minister's lips twisted up into a grin. You are Kakashi of the Sharingan then? His tone was casual, but the old hand that gripped the Shuegu trembled slightly. It seemed that he truly did feel fear knowing that a shinobi of great legend stood before him. I heard that Hatake Kakashi lost his Sharingan in the Great Ninja War some dozen years ago. A false rumor then? Kakashi shrugged. Sadly, it's just as you see. My Sharingan is alive and well. No matter what talents you have, you don't begin to compare to the Sage of Six Paths' power, the Prime Minister spat. How pathetic. The Prime Minister froze and glared at the ninja. What did you say? You're mistaking for your own strength the power of a tool you just happened to get hold of. But that misunderstanding won't last long. Kakashi glanced up at the sky again. The cloud of evaporation generated in the collision between mist and the Shuegu had been knocked away by the wind from below and was rolling up high into the sky. "The mist has cleared away," he said. "Your future is death. You brat. Don't be so full of yourself." The Prime Minister raised the Shuegu up above his head. Abruptly, there was an incredible clap of thunder, and a burst of lightning struck the Prime Minister. Illuminated by the white bolt, the area was nothing but light and shadow for a few seconds. The Prime Minister fell to his knees, where the rock had broken away to form a deep fissure. What happened? Eyes and ears spinning from the sudden roar and impact, Nanera collapsed on the spot and gaped upward. Even though the dawn in the eastern sky was without a cloud, a gray mass hung above Nanera's head. The massive amount of steam generated by the battle between Kakashi and the Prime Minister had turned into a cumulonimbus cloud. In the rising air currents because of mist's heat, causing friction with the cold air in the area and leading to a thundercloud. The Shuegu the Prime Minister brandished became a lightning rod and called down the strike. The bolt became 100 million volts of divine punishment to pierce the Prime Minister's body. Pop! Hidden by the cloud of sand that danced up in the lightning strike, Kakashi released his transformation technique. There was no change in his appearance. Well, almost none. The tomo of the Sharingan in his eye had disappeared. With transformation jutsu, he could make it look like he had the Sharingan. It was a cheap trick, but thanks to how well known the name Kakashi of the Sharingan was, it ended up being a fairly effective bluff to avoid pointless fighting. When he used it together with a smoke bomb with Jinjutsu effects, most shinobi got the wrong idea that Kakashi of the Sharingan still existed and was doing just fine. At some point, the sound of gunfire from below the cliff had stopped. The Prime Minister toppled into the fissure in the stone face. Kakashi ran over, sat him up, and ripped open his gown to find a lightning pattern rising clearly on his flat chest. "Kakashi. That lightning dash. I'll explain later." He quickly cut off Nanera and put an ear to the old man's chest. When he confirmed that his heart had stopped, he brought his glove-free hand down and began to push on the center of his chest. Belatedly realizing that Kakashi was doing CPR, Nanera went around to the Prime Minister's head and made sure his airway was clear. When Kakashi stopped pushing on his chest, Nanera put his mouth over the Prime Minister's and blew air in. But they got no reaction, although they continued to do the chest compressions for a while. Just as Nanera was starting to think that it was too late, the Prime Minister spat up blood. What a relief. He came back. Nanera checked that the man was indeed breathing again, and then all the strength ran out of his body. He dropped to the ground. His limbs suddenly felt very heavy. So many things had happened these last few days, and he was incredibly tired. Kakashi really was an amazing guy. He always stayed calm, whatever the situation, and guided Nanera forward. There probably wasn't another guy as reliable as him. Lying on his back and looking up at the sky, Nanera heard Kakashi's hoarse voice. "Ah, good." His eyes grew wide. He had overheard what was probably Kakashi speaking to himself unconsciously. Was it the Prime Minister's resuscitation that was good? Was it that they won the fight? Or that they were able to get the Shuegu back? Whatever it was, Kakashi had just barely managed it. Nanera sat up slowly and looked at his tutor, whose face was damp with sweat. It was hard to tell because of the mask, but when he looked closely, Kakashi was terribly pale. His constant composure was a bluff. He had just been pretending he was fine. The truth was, he was struggling. Nanera wondered whether he should go and hold Kakashi up, but quickly gave up on the idea. He had probably always lived like this. Hiding his feelings, chipping away at himself, he had fought with a level head and a cool look. Always to protect someone. Nanera prayed that he hadn't always lived this life alone. He had no idea if this were true, but he felt sure Kakashi had been blessed with amazing friends, and he'd been able to keep fighting all this time because he had people supporting him. He wanted that to be true. Otherwise, it was just too painful. Even after being struck by lightning, the Shuigu didn't have a scratch on it. Kakashi examined it and found that the ring on the end could come off. He pulled out a small scroll from inside the staff. Kakashi, that's... Nanera started. The Shuigu contract, I suppose. That would explain why Kakashi hadn't been able to find it no matter how he'd searched the office. He spread the scroll out. Just like with a summoning contract, the previous king's name and fingerprint were on it in blood. Immediately to the left of this was the Prime Minister's name. Nanera. You make the contract, Manari said decisively. I ended up the Prime Minister's puppet and made a mess of the country. I should be punished together with him. Nanera looked at the Shuigu in Kakashi's hand and fell silent. Even though he'd made up his mind to become king, his resolve wavered before his older sister. It's okay, she told him. I'm sure you will become a great leader. Just like the 6th Hokage. That last bit gave him the push he needed. He scrunched up his face and looked at Kakashi. I want to make the contract. What should I do? Kakashi cut the tip of Nanera's finger with a knife and made him sign his name. Only a short while ago, he hadn't been able to write the name he signed now. After he pressed his fingertip on the page below it, he looked up with an anxious face. I did it. What do I do now? That's it, Kakashi said. Now you should be able to use the Shuigu. A doubtful look on his face, Nanera gripped the staff. Even though it was the first time he touched it, it fit neatly into his hand. This tool was, for Nanera, a present from 3 fathers. One was the Sage of 6 Paths, who had brought water to this dry land and helped his ancestors to build the country. The second was his actual father, who had ruled this country wisely and passed on the tool to Nanera's generation. And the third was, of course. Can you use it? Manari peered at him anxiously. Nanera nodded firmly. It's good. I can tell. He stood on the edge of the cliff and held the Shuigu up high. The decorative bit hanging from the ring made a clear ringing sound and began to shake. He felt something like an invisible force pour out of the Shuigu. Was it chakra? The special power that the Sage of 6 Paths had left for them so long ago, a prayer that this country would prosper. The chakra slowly spread out, like the ripples made by a leaf on the surface of water. Eventually, droplets hit his cheeks. Rain. Manari murmured, holding out the palm of her hand. The long-awaited rain began to gently moisten the earth. The water soaked into the dry ground. A wet Kakashi looked at Nanera holding up the Shuigu. He would lead the country from now on as its young king. Kakashi knew in his bones just how difficult a job it was to walk ahead of others as their leader. It wasn't an easy road, but he was sure Nanera could make it. Sometimes, he wasn't sure if the things he had done as Hokage had been right. Sudden developments were accompanied by significant pain. While Kakashi had given birth to something new when he changed society, a lot of things had disappeared. The minority was sometimes cut away for the sake of the majority. When he did meet Obito again someday, would he be able to hold his head high? Be confident that he had properly fulfilled his duties as the 6th Hokage? The one who had given him the answer to these questions without the slightest hesitation had been an unschooled boy who couldn't read. The 6th Hokage is the most powerful shinobi. And the greatest leader. That was the only time he'd been happy from the bottom of his heart that he hid his face behind a mask. To think his cheeks could get that hot at a few words from a child he'd only just met. It was decided that the Prime Minister would be returned to the capital and tried under the laws of the land. The rogue shinobi would also be returned to their respective villages. The rain Nanera had made fall dampened the ammunition powder and rendered the cannons useless. The fighting ended, and the people finally came together to rejoice in the blessing of the rain, no longer enemy or ally. The village buildings had been destroyed, but the people who had evacuated were all safe. And while a great number of people had been injured in the fighting in the artillery camp, there had been no deaths. None of us had any real weapons, after all. And the village was empty, the grown-ups said with bitter smiles. But the fact that no one had died was better proof than anything that no one had truly wanted this war. After waiting for the rain to end, Nanera gathered everyone in the plaza and announced his sister's retirement. "So that means you're the king now, Nanera?" Margot asked. "Well, I guess it kind of does," Nanera replied, embarrassed. The villagers surrounded him, grinning. "Nanera, you have to say a little something. Now that you're king, you have to give speeches all the time." "That'll be after the formal coronation in the capital," he protested. "Come on, practice now." "No, it's embarrassing," he said and tried to escape, but the grown-ups caught him. "You're the king," Margot said. "You can't be embarrassed by people like us." He realized that she was right and gave up the fight. He climbed onto a bale of hay and stood tall, his hands thrust into the pockets of his jacket. "Hey, that's pretty rude. The king can't be sticking his hands in his pockets." Sumir jeered and nipped his grand moment in the bud. "Shut up. This is fine." He couldn't exactly display his hands to everyone when they were covered in cuts from climbing the cliff. Nanera had learned from Kakashi that enduring the pain and walking ahead of people was the role of a leader. He looked down at the villagers from his bale of hay and began to speak, looking at each of their faces in turn. What he wanted to do as king. What he had to do. He was still young and inexperienced, and there were so many things he didn't know. He hoped they would all help him. He wasn't very good at explaining difficult things, so he got stuck on the words, despite how certain his feelings were. When he felt the panic rising up in him, he looked out at Kakashi standing all the way at the back and was able to relax. He had so many questions. But Kakashi just kept repeating, "I'll explain later." Nanera had to interrogate him as soon as this speech was over. The thing he most wanted to ask was, "Who exactly are you?" And well, he had an idea about that, but he would make Kakashi tell him himself. And then he would get angry that Kakashi had kept it a secret all this time, and then he'd thank him for helping him. When he met Kakashi's eyes, Kakashi smiled, the corners of his eyes wrinkling. Even though he was in the middle of a speech, Nanera also smiled finally, unconsciously. That was the last time he saw Kakashi. After his speech, he ran all over in search of him, but Kakashi was nowhere to be found. All that he left behind was the blue gem that was a keepsake of Nanera's father, tucked into the pocket of Nanera's coat. Final chapter, Prologue. 6 months after Itachi Kakashi vanished from the land of Ridaku, the new king, Nanera, was seeing his first winter after inheriting the throne. Soon, the mountains would be covered in snow, and people from neighboring villages would no longer be able to come and go until spring came. That fall there had been an unprecedented harvest. The rainfall the king made filled rivers and brought water to the fields, and the wheat crops thrived. All the villages had enough food and feed to make it through the winter. "Nanera, there's a letter from Konohagakure." Minari came into the office with Rei in tow. After stepping down from the throne, Minari had wanted to be punished in the same way as the prime minister. But she had yielded to the firm request of the government officials and been appointed an internal aide. She took on the paperwork that Nanera was bad at doing himself and helped Nanera however he needed to restore the country. Rei flew up from her arm and landed on the perch on Nanera's desk. He made chirping sounds as if seeking praise for making his long trip to and from the land of fire. In his talons was a small package. A present from the 7th Hokage, Uzumaki Naruto. He opened it, a book. On the cover, it said, All Ages Version, The New Makeout Paradise. Oh! This is the book that Kakashi was talking about. Nanera picked it up and giggled. A thick, deluxe edition wrapped in a shiny jacket. Next to the promotional blurb on the bottom that said recommended by the 6th Hokage was a photo of the 6th Hokage holding up a thumb and winking. He had bleary, sleepy eyes, a somehow absent-minded man. How dare he not say a thing all this time? As if reading Nanera's mind, Ray gave a short cry and shook his head. It's better to avoid a fight than win it. When had Kakashi said that? A good leader didn't win battles, they prevented one from even starting. If that were true, then Kakashi really was the best leader. Stroking the cover of All Ages version, the new Makeout Paradise, Nanera suddenly felt like crying and hurried to compose himself. His encounter with Kakashi was the best present connecting him with the previous king. 15 days after saving the land of Ridaku and leaving Nanera, Kakashi returned to the village of Konohagakure. The journey that had taken 20 days was slightly shorter on the return, now that he knew the roads. The first place he headed was a bar in the new city. A server who knew him smiled wryly when he saw Kakashi and pointed him to a seat in the back. On the other side of the closed sliding doors, he heard familiar voices screaming in revelry. The party he said that he might be able to attend appeared to be in full swing. He finally relaxed. The celebratory mood made it easier. His undercover mission to an unknown land was over, and he had made it back to a familiar environment. He was also keenly aware of how precious and rare it was to have comrades who could make him feel this way. He was late and would be noticed, so he used his honed skills as a ninja to make himself invisible and quietly open the sliding door at one end to mix in with the crowd. At least that was the plan. A brilliant former student from the Foundation who excelled at detecting people got behind him suddenly and clasped his shoulder. Honestly, you're so late, Master. I thought you weren't coming. It was Sai. He appeared to be pretty drunk, his face was bright red. Ah, I just got the start time wrong, Kakashi lied, with a wry smile. Only a few people had been informed of his mission to the land of Ridaku and his purpose there. Anyway, Sai, where's your wife? He casually changed the subject. I'm right here. Hino poked her face out from behind Sai. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, but not nearly to the extent of Sai's. Known for being a handsome couple, the two of them made a pretty picture even if the venue was a bar for the common rabble. Sai hadn't begun drinking until recently. People in Black Ops couldn't get drunk and lose control, after all. And he turned out to be an absurdly cheap drunk. He only started drinking with people once the country had stabilized and the frequency of being called for an urgent mission dropped dramatically. It was very funny how tipsy he got after drinking the tiniest bit, and everyone would haze him and pour drinks down his throat. What are you drinking, Master? The new stuff they got in from the land of waves was yummy. Sai said and offered not a menu but a bamboo plate of tempura. Kakashi thanked him and took the plate, handing it to Ino in the same flowing motion as he set himself down in a chair in the corner. Ino held up an unsteady sigh. When Kiba began to make fun of them and the way they clung to each other, Karui whacked him on the head and told him not to be crude. Next to her, Lee, with glazed-over eyes, turned toward the olive branch decorating the table and began speaking intently. Choji was yelling at Tenten, "Why would you eat all the carriage chicken by yourself? They're all so full of life." Kakashi sipped sake as he stared absently out at the festive group. They had long since reached adulthood, and some were now parents while others were active on the front lines as shinobi. Even so, no matter how many years passed, to Kakashi, they were his precious students and the next generation who needed to be protected. Seeing them having so much fun was enough to ease his heart. If Asuma and Hade had been alive, they no doubt would have thought the same thing. As Kakashi indulged in an emotional moment, a squirt glass was thrust forward before him. Amber liquid poured over a large sphere of ice filled the glass. "Welcome back, Master Kakashi." The current Hokage sat down next to him and clinked glasses. Downing the spirit stilled the fatigue of returning from a mission, and Kakashi leaned against the sliding door. "You really helped me out going to the land of Ridaku." Naruto turned his blue eyes on him. "Whatever the country might be like, I definitely wanted to avoid a war, and I didn't want any embers for future fights. Be good to the new king." Kakashi replied. "He said he's going to try and do what he can." "Of course. He's your student, and I used to be your student, so we're practically brothers. Naruto's voice was as forceful and confident as always. But when Kakashi took a peek at the Hokage's face when he wasn't looking, he couldn't say his former student looked good, not even to flatter him. The slight haggardness of his cheeks wasn't just because of the many demands placed on the Hokage. We have to do something soon. Kakashi watched for the right time and left the bar. A humid breeze blew outside. Perhaps because he was at a much lower altitude now, the moon and stars felt further away than when he'd looked up at them in the land of Ridaku. Shikamaru was leaning against the wall of the bar smoking a cigarette while he waited for Kakashi. Master Kakashi. Welcome back from your mission. Where are Sakura and Sasuke? They're still not back from the Astronomical Institute. I guess things got complicated there. Oh yeah? Kakashi said. Well, those two should be fine. Yes. The issue is with Naruto's illness, Shikamaru said, lowering his voice and tucking his cigarette butt into a portable ashtray. He furrowed his brow in annoyance and pulled out a second cigarette from the case his wife had given him. If we don't hurry, we'll run out of time. Naruto will always. Yeah. It's the CX, came a cheerful voice from the other side of the road. 3 pairs of annoying footfalls grew closer. Boruto, Sarada, and Mitsuki. When they heard the children's voices, Kakashi and Shikamaru wiped the serious looks from their faces. Old May and Kakashi I. It's been like forever. What, you kids are here too? Shikamaru put away the cigarette he had taken out and indicated the curtain over the door curtly. Everyone's inside. Go on and eat supper or something. Here. All right. Someone else is paying. Boruto threw his arms up in the Don't take advantage of the chaos and drink alcohol, Shikamaru said sternly. Kids get juice. We know. I'm heading out. I got a present for Master Iruka, Sarada said, holding up a cherry pink paper bag. Strawberry daifuku from Tammy Traditional Sweets in the Old City. They were widely known to be extraordinary and quickly sold out, so they were hard to get a hold of, a rare treat. All right, you're doing a homestay at Master Iruka's, right? Kakashi said. Yeah. Sarada nodded happily. 'Cause Mom and Dad are away on a long mission. Master Iruka's an amazing cook. He's teaching me all kinds of stuff. It's loads of fun. Oh. He is pretty skilled. Iruka was a long-time bachelor like Kakashi, but unlike Kakashi, who paid little attention to his personal life to start with, Iruka kept a neat home. In contrast with the desk of the 6th Hokage, which was always covered with scattered papers and documents, the principal's office at the academy was famously neat and tidy. 6th, you haven't been in the village at all lately, Mitsuki said. Where'd you go? Just visiting some onsens, Kakashi lied without batting an eye. Naturally, even his son Boruto hadn't been told that Naruto was in a difficult situation. Kakashi had promised not to tell. Onsens again? Old man Kakashi, you're always at the onsen. Boruto looked at Kakashi, exasperated. You'll turn into a prune if all you do is sit in the tub, you know. Wouldn't like that at all. Kakashi smiled, his sleepy eyes narrowing. End of Kakashi Retsuden, the 6th Hokage and the Failed Prince. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe for lots more.